You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Clear the aisles, the Projectionist, that's Semicha. Hi, I'm here with Rabbi Kolakowski. And as we approach this last week of the calendar year 2023, I actually wanted to talk first about a film that features the December 31st, January 1st change from one year to the other, the New Year's Eve celebration, in a way that doesn't have any religious connections at all. I mentioned to you off pod that this aligns with a famous truth of Revelation that in America, New Year's Day has become just a way to sort of mark some sort of aspect of somewhat of renewal, but not connected at all to counting the new year in the Christian sense at all. And we can debate,
even though it's a Christian holiday.
Yeah, we can debate about this, but clearly in films itself that feature New Year's, it's usually about a party. It's usually about some sort of get together. And there's been so many films that have used New Year's in some form or another. You could probably, to make a collection of it. And it's very different than the way the Christmas scene is used. And the Christmas scene is usually some sort of spiritual, miraculous, some sort of better side of you. Whereas the New Year's Eve part is usually some sort of tension involved. Who are you going to kiss? Who are you going to be involved with? Right? What's going to happen at that moment? Is this the moment for me to make my move? Or are we lost in the crowd? Can we find each other? I talked about the film Bachelor Mother, which has a beautiful New Year's Eve scene. Which, Bachelor Mother might be considered a Christmas movie, but the New Year's Eve scene that's in it is really disconnected from any sense of religious, being moved in a religious way. It's more about there's a party, there's people, who are you with, and are you taking a new leaf? What's going to be your resolution, so to speak, for that time? And I think there's a film that captures this idea and has as its central dramatic moments of what's happening during New Year's. That is the remake, actually, of a 1938 film called Holiday, and it was directed by George Cukor, and who also I think was an English expatriate, and it starred Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, although you're very familiar, of course, it's up with 1940s Philadelphia Story, where you have Grant and Hepburn, and of course Grant and Hepburn were together as well in bringing a baby, Howard Hawks' screwball comedy that of course includes the leopard, I think, baby. This film, in many ways, I think is superior to both of those. And Grant and Hepburn have a chemistry and an adult understanding of each other, which I think really even surpasses what many people believe is like this urbane sophistication of Philadelphia Story. It's based on a play by Philip Barry, who was very popular in the 20s. I think it was in the late 20s that he wrote this play. It's basically about a free spirit. And that's really what the play is about, is the meeting of two free spirits. It's set in the background. When Philip Barry wrote the play, of course, it was before the stock market crash. And of course, that was a period in the United States where we're increasing their wealth exponentially with all the different conglomerations, and America was this incredible industrial giant, and people were the wealth was popping up everywhere. And part of what Barry's play was sort of like trying to rein in this fascination with money and describing the fact that people were losing themselves, that although they were making money and they were brilliantly perhaps understanding how deals were supposed to be made, but what were they really becoming within themselves? Character whose name is Johnny Case. He is the dramatis personae of the play, of Philip Barry's play, and of the film versions that were made. This version, though, is clearly superior. One of the reasons why it's superior is because it had George Cukor behind the camera. But 8 years had taught the moguls and the directors and the Nevi'im what you can do with sound and what you need to do with the camera. That the fact that you have sound doesn't just mean now, let's put on the play. Let's take Barry's play and pretty much keep the camera stationary and just have close-ups perhaps when the characters are mouthing the lines from the screenplay, which is basically built almost directly from what was done in the theater. By 1938, they realized the potential of film and sound film in a way that they could alter some of the original, and they could use the camera and the way they were shooting things, and also in terms of the production design, in a way that didn't need all the verbiage that the play had. And although I didn't see the original, what I have read about was that the characters were somewhat wooden in the original. And here you have, in this production, you have two of the most dynamic characters in terms of not only their line readings, but their whole physical persona. And that, of course, is Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. Grant actually, in this film, plays a fellow from Baltimore. And again, we've talked in the past how American audiences were willing to dismiss the obvious, still English accent that he brought to all of his films because they loved him so much, they embraced him so much. And I think part of the reason Cary Grant liked this film, and you can see it was his real persona in a way, was because he himself came from very modest beginnings, just like the character. And part of what the point of view of this character is to be shocked by the ostentations, by the wealth that he is now become connected to. On a skiing trip, he fell in love and had a whirlwind romance with an heiress, someone who he didn't realize was so wealthy. It's only now when he comes to her address and he enters through the servants' quarters that he realizes that the building that looks like a museum or a great office is really a place that holds four people and a bevy of servants and a gigantic type of mansion that takes up a whole city block in Manhattan. And Johnny is astounded by it. And what he realizes is that there's an assault on his values. Because although he is, in a certain sense, a climber, he's someone who has pulled himself up from his bootstraps, who's been working since he's 8 years old, whose father was a greengrocer or something like that in Baltimore. And he's now already making his way into the business world. He still retains in his heart a sense of the freedom of expression. Grant uses, I don't think this was the original play, he does a number of his acrobatic moves. Grant started off in England as a juggler and as an acrobat, and he does a number of acrobatic moves here in this film. Supposedly that by tumbling and by flipping himself over, he's able to think better. It's a sort of like a coping device. And the film uses it a number of times, in fact, in ways to sort of like emphasize various, in fact, every tumble is probably significant in terms of where the character is going. Aiding him is a couple that he is very close with. They're played by Edward Everett Horton, who plays Professor Potter, along with his wife, Jean Dixon, who plays Susan Potter. And they are what we would call today smart, middle-class intellectuals who have their heads on straight and have a great sense of humor. As you know, Yitzchak, Edward Everett Horton had a very long career. I, of course, encountered him originally, and you know where I encountered him originally, in Bullwinkle. He had his fractured fairy tales, which were...
That's where I encountered him first also.
Yes. And he was great. I don't think, he narrated them perfectly. And it seems, although Jay Ward, of course, was the brains behind Bullwinkle, it seems like Edward Everett Horton wasn't just the talent, the voice talent. The type of flipping the script of all these fairy tales seemed to be something that Edward Horton took some delight in. I don't think he was just given cue cards or the script to read. Again, Bullwinkle aficionados can talk about how much Edward Horton actually contributed. But as I mentioned last week with George Sanders, he was a character actor whose personality bled into so much of the roles that he played. And he, of course, I think had a career even in the silence. I think it went all the way from definitely the late 20s, I think, all the way into the television era. So, I don't know how many films you can look up and see, but he was in many of the Astaire Rogers team ups, and always playing somewhat of, not a complete foolish comic relief, but some sort of character that you definitely would get a chortle from. You could sometimes laugh at and sometimes laugh with. I think he was gay. I think it's pretty obvious that he was a gay man, and he had a real lively career. He and in this film, he sort of represents a conscience of Johnny's, to make sure that Johnny doesn't get so hot. It's really interesting how Hollywood was able to sort of, dress up the effeminate aspects of Edward Everett Horton, and he was able to really have a very a great career where most people probably knew he was gay, right? So anyway, he does a fine job in this film. But really, the standout character is, of course, Hepburn. Hepburn was interesting. She actually was an understudy for the original stage play in this role that she plays. She plays Linda Seaton, and she has a number of beautiful soliloquies where she actually speaks the spirit of nonconformity and how important that is, and how important it is to discover who you are, that you could have a home. And this was part of the reason why I think the producers thought it would play well as a screwball comedy, even for the masses who only had a dime or so to spend a week on going to a movie, because it sort of exposed the emptiness of wealth. But I think the reason why it wasn't such a box office hit was because people didn't understand Johnny, Cary Grant's character's desire, which was to basically marry the other sister, who I would say, played by Doris Nolan, because she sort of turns from being sort of sweet and caring to someone who really is very much like her father, who really is very conventional. And although she enjoys the romance of being involved with this incredibly handsome person, she expects that person to pretty much turn into a conventional businessman, just with a lighter side, as opposed to what Cary Grant wants, what Johnny wants, which is to earn enough money to then retire and then figure out what their life is about. Not to wait till you're old. In other words, the normal trajectory is, you work and you work and you hope you make enough money. Then you retire and then you're too old to enjoy life. What he wanted to do was to actually invest himself and then take a holiday. Not the New Year's Eve, but New Year's Eve is very much an important symbol of, okay, now that's over, what are you going to do? And what he wanted to do was actually to discover, based on the wealth, because unfortunately the world keeps on pushing us down. The reality of gas and mortgage, the reality of schar chinuch, as we would say among ourselves, surrounds us in a way that we almost don't have time for anything. And I think we can understand, almost in a very modern way, what he's looking for. He's looking for using his mind, a quick mind, to make money in this area, but then to retreat completely from it. And then spend a number of years together with his soulmate, figuring out what it is that human beings should do, what it is you as a human being should do, discovering various aspects of spirituality. all of that type of seeking, the Jack Kerouac type of stuff. Oh, I'm just going to go on the road and find out who I am. Practically can only be done if you have a bank, something that's bankrolling you. Right? Otherwise, you end up in a world of danger, especially in the 1930s. So, this was an idea that was very novel. This was, and it didn't play so well for Depression audiences. That somebody should just, want to make money, and then okay, now I'm just going to become a bum. They thought it was somewhat of a slap in the face, but I think the film has aged pretty well, and I think the messages of the film are still very important. Lou Ayres is in the film as well, and of course he's not Dr. Kildare in this film, but he has a great role as sort of like the drunken son who resents his dad. Lou Ayres' character, this drunken truth teller, is very similar to the character that Van Heflin played in his Oscar-winning performance in Johnny Eager as Jeff Hartnett. But that was a role that Hollywood enjoyed, having a fellow who doesn't seem to be doing much, but is able, through drink and the way the inhibitions are loosened to drink, to be able to say truths. Like, for example, in this film, one of the great truths he says is that although Katharine Hepburn plays supposedly the spinster sister who doesn't have the looks of her younger sister and isn't as popular and seems to be strange and idiosyncratic, he says to her, "You're 10 times the person the other sister is, and you're more beautiful as well." And even though in terms of classic beauty, she wasn't, but in terms of the vibrancy, the dynamism that Hepburn brought, that was like a great truth that her brother is able to sell. Like I said, so it's in a way, it sort of takes the secular aspect of what New Year's Eve has become and what New Year's has become, because and I'll just end with this, there's a debate between what Kate wants to announce the engagement to her sister, to Johnny, in the playroom, in a little room that is like the smallest room in the house, where little artifacts from their youth are still there. Punch and Judy set up a number of interesting stuffed animals. That's where she wants the party to be, intimate, only the closest friends. Whereas her father and her sister want to throw the most lavish New Year's Eve party in their magnificent mansion, with people running through all the different rooms and a gala event that really loses all sense of any personal way to somehow change yourself, as opposed to we're together in this room of memory, this room where we can dedicate a room that has a picture of their mother who's passed away. And here, they end up, of course, announcing it at New Year's, at the moment of New Year's, in this on this incredible staircase. I think the film was nominated for its incredible sets because they are really, they really went out of their way to be able to indicate the opulence. You really believe you are inside one of these incredible mansions. So it is a film, I think, that it goes down easy, and I think it's really one of the films that allowed Cary Grant to feel very comfortable. Hollywood wasn't sure what to do with Cary Grant. They knew he was handsome. They knew he was very physical. This was a film, I think, that he really was pushing towards that American icon that he later became. So that's speaking about English-born individuals who became the quintessential American. I think probably Cary Grant might be Exhibit A. It would have to be Leslie Townes Hope, otherwise known as Bob. Bob Hope was born in England, like Cary Grant, to a middle-class family, or towards the poor side, and his family emigrated when he was 5 years old, eventually, I think, settling somewhere near Cleveland. and Hope had a connection, as you know, Yitzchak, to Cleveland his whole life. I think there was a time that he was a owner of the Cleveland Indians, if not the complete owner. And just like Cary Grant, he had to really earn his stripes. Unlike Cary Grant, he wasn't blessed with the Adonis looks, and he had to. But he worked as a electrician. He cut trees. He was famously a boxer, as you know. He was, and I think he won a couple of rounds too, despite his film persona as a complete, total goofball and a coward. He actually, he was actually able to justify himself as somewhat of an athlete. He also was part of an act when he was growing up where he was pretty much of an accomplished dancer. And you can see that in a number of the 54 films that he starred in, where he can do it pretty much more than just a little soft shoe. In a film that I was talking to you about off pod, The Seven Little Foys, he engages in a tap dancing off with Cagney. And that's a wonderful classic scene. You can get it on YouTube and see it, of Hope versus Cagney in a tap dance standoff. But Hope obviously had used his physical gifts, not like a tumbler like Cary Grant, but definitely a lot of physical comedy. I think especially during the glory years when Hope rose in the mid and late 1940s to become really one of the top 3 box office stars in the United States. I think that lasted up until 1951 or 1952, and then he sort of, I think, as you mentioned to me off pod, he sort of started riding on his laurels a little bit. But during that incredibly creative period, from I guess 1942 or 43 up until 1952, Hope was one of the most bankable, recognizable comedic stars in Hollywood. And he did make 7 films with Crosby. Crosby, by the way, had cameos in many of his other films when they were Hope solo ventures. But as you know, MGM and Paramount and Fox were always looking to create a comedy team. The film I want to recommend, I just happened to come across it, as we say in Hebrew, b'mikra, when it was sort of suggested to me by Prime Video, was the 1944 vehicle called The Princess and the Pirate. Hope is neither princess or pirate in this film, although towards the end of the film, he does do a little bit of a pirate act, which is very funny considering that he's mimicking the sort of Bluebeard Captain Hook pirate in the beginning, played by Victor McLaglen. And Hope does a pretty good job imitating McLaglen's gesticulations and other manic pirate-like sayings, which is quite funny. The film is obviously, and we've talked about this often, Hope made a career of bursting the fourth wall and constantly talking to the audience. And I can tell you, I don't get tired of it. I think Hope at his best can be seen even 80 years later and be enjoyed. Again, it's a completely different comic persona than Benny or Fred Allen. It's basically the wiseacre. Many people believe he was actually the father of what we call today the stand-up comedian. And of course, this was something he did on the radio and on television. But he was sort of like the stand-up comic, even during the film, where he would act almost like a Greek chorus, like commenting on, can you believe this is what's going on? Can you believe they paid me to do this? I'm not making another film for Goldwyn. I mean, and you bought into it. You didn't mind that he was breaking that fourth wall. You didn't mind, like, even in all the road pictures or any of the pictures he was in, or some of the pictures that were based on the Old West, where he would consistently make all these anachronistic comments, and you didn't mind that. That's what Hope was about. In this film, Virginia Mayo plays his love interest. It also has a great all-star supporting cast. Besides Victor McLaglen, who seemingly having a lot of fun playing this pirate with his hook, you also have two Walters, and I would say these two Walters are two of the greatest supporting actors. There's Walter Brennan, Walter Slezak. Now, Walter Brennan, won 2 Academy Awards as supporting actor. And in this film, he plays a different type of character altogether. In the late 50s and early 60s, Brennan played like a codgy old goat who had a mean, ornery streak to him. He was in a number of Westerns where he was a menacing figure, most famously in How the West Was Won. Of course, he was Grandpa Amos in The Real McCoys on television. But in this film, he plays a total comic loon. Like he's called Featherhead, and he is a fellow that's on the pirate ship who everyone considers the tattoo expert, who isn't good for much else. And Brennan, again, the film is directed by David Butler, who I highlighted. We highlighted Butler's film "It's a Great Field," which I said was sort of like a television 60s comedic, although it was done in the late 40s. This film that Butler did as well, it has a little more. It moves with a little more classic comedic maturity, if that makes any sense. There's wonderful. Maybe the stock footage, but you have a lot of good pirate scenes of the pirates attacking one boat, attacking the other. It isn't so obvious the blue screen behind them, and in general, there's also Slezak plays it straight the whole way, and he is the ultimate corrupt official. Despite the fact he's supposed to be connected to England, but he has this foreign accent. There's situations where Hope is in drag, playing a gypsy woman. There's a number of gay sort of references that come up, and which is typical of its time, but it's really nothing that anybody should find objectionable. It goes down very easy. Is there any message in this film? Okay, so he plays an actor that has kept all his reviews that he played in Leningrad. He says in Leningrad he utters what the Russian reviewer said. And she asks him, "What does that mean?" And he says, "It means I'm a shlemiel." There's a number of references to other films and other actors. Democrats and Republicans also come in. So again, it's really, in a way, an interesting entry into the more than 50 films that Hope made. I think that both of us agree that was the glory period of Hope, was that period from the early to mid 40s to the beginning of the 1950s. The Hope of the 60s and 70s and 80s, despite all the trips that he made to Vietnam and throughout wherever the troops were stationed, and the television specials that he did, all of that was really like banking its hook on what he had done. His theme song, which was "Thanks for the Memory," "Thanks for the Memory," or "Thanks for the Memories," really sort of indicates that he was really the old guy. That he represents old humor, nostalgia. And although God really graced him with incredible age, I mean, he was, he wasn't really that. Although he had a number of bouts of illness in his mid and late 90s, he lived relatively good health till he was past 100 years old. And that's quite incredible. He was still making some public appearances, receiving some awards. I think one of his best lines was, of course, he hosted the Oscars, I think, 19 years in a row. And I think that one of his best lines was in 1968, where he said, "All right, well, tonight we're giving out the Oscars, or as it's called in my house, Passover," because part of the joke is that he was always passed over, that there was no way he was ever going to win an Oscar. But because usually the Oscars, by the way, usually were televised very close to Pesach, something a little bit untoward of the films he made in the 1960s with people like Elke Sommer and others, where they played off of him, and somehow they could be in love with this guy that was at that time, in his mid 60s, and or in the 70s, in his last feature film, he was already in his 70s. So there was something about the fact that Hope, I don't think, understood how to age. I don't think he got it. I don't think he was of a certain type, and he thought that maybe through the magic of movies and stunt doubles and trick camera work photography, he could still play Sorrowful Jones or Sylvester Crosby, which is his name in this film. He could still do that type of stuff, as he aged. I think I think that's part of the reason why he couldn't really make films. It's different than I think than other comedic actors. Obviously Robin Williams seemed to have been able to bridge that chasm by being involved in serious films like he was, and seemingly being able to allow himself to perhaps recede somewhat and not be so manic. But again, when I think his suicide sort of indicates that Robin unfortunately wasn't able really to tone up to that. It's talk about discovering what you're about and what your life purpose is. Part of it is knowing how to bow out. Part of it is knowing how to what you can still do. I think when you're a star, especially like Hope was, it's hard to just I'm just going to take some bit parts from this point on. I mentioned to you, Yitzchak, that I read when I was doing some research about Hope that Goldwyn actually was upset that he didn't have someone of that sort of comedic talent that he could actually build a film around. And he went to someone who was making a big splash on the New York stage, Danny Kaye, one of the really most talented total package actors. And he then, when Hope refused to work for MGM, Danny Kaye became an MGM star in a number of films, some of them that we've talked about on this program. Kaye, I think, knew how to get old. Kaye realized he couldn't do the type of stuff he did in the 40s and 50s. But even the Danny Kaye show, which was an Emmy Award television show in the 1960s, he did enough of his old stuff, especially his linguistic talents, and he was able to feature a lot of young talent. And unlike Bob Hope, that I'm going to do a special and I'm going to have all the All-Americans come on, or all the beauty pageant people are going to come, or some golfer. I think Danny Kaye recognized that he passed the torch on to the next generation, and I think in that sense, Goldwyn got it right. And I think it's really part of what one has to do in life. You surprised me about what you want to talk about, because it doesn't seem to be the type of film that you would recommend, but it's really a film that based on one of the great spy novels of the 1920s, and which is the 39 Steps, right?
Yes. Since you were talking about British expatriates who settled in America, I figured I would speak about one of your favorites, Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
And, before he came to America, when he was still in Britain, he didn't do the remake, unlike the one that he made the year before. This is the 39 Steps from 1935. In 34, he made The Man Who Knew Too Much, which he himself remade in the 50s.
With Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day, of course. Yes.
Yes, and the original was with Peter Lorre, one of Peter Lorre's first movies. I think his first English.
I think it might have been.
But then the next year he made the 39 Steps. He had a bigger budget for that. When it was remade in the 50s, that wasn't Hitchcock. It was someone else who remade it.
Right, and it was definitely an inferior film as well. Only Hitch could remake himself.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so did you enjoy the 39 Steps? It has, of course, it has sort of like it's all filmed in Britain, but it has sort of like an American character, Robert Donnet, who plays a Canadian.
Plays a Canadian character.
Yeah, he's a Canadian character, yeah. And Madeline Carroll, I think, is his love interest in it.
Yeah, and he's watching a Mr. Memory show at the beginning of the movie.
It's done in an English dance hall, like a vaudeville type of scene. Mm-hmm.
And then a spy, Hannibal Smith, takes him away. Then there's shots fired, and they wind up getting handcuffed to each other. It's really an exciting movie all the way through. So that's kind of
I look. Part of what Hitch did, he had a formula of a character who is basically innocent, but maybe needs to learn something. There's a growth arc. It isn't just, I'm completely innocent and now I am now accused and now I'm on the run and I seem to be connected to something which I didn't want to be connected to, and now I find myself having to solve this mystery or find out what the spy ring is about. And Hitch did this, of course, with Saboteur, with Robert Cummings, and most famously, of course, with Cary Grant in North by Northwest. And the film is very similar, that you have a character who falls into this spy ring, or that he's, and then he ends up, of course, being hunted himself. And he seems to be the one that is in trouble, and he has to, for saving himself, he needs to discover what the idea of the 39 Steps is and what it really is about. It has a number, I guess, of some of Hitch's signature camera moves that he later perfected when he, in his years when he came to Hollywood, those glory years from Rebecca on.
It was interesting. This obviously Hitchcock started already in the silent era, but you have a lot of his tropes being used, things that he would use later. In the middle of the movie, the main character gets shot, which a lot of people compare to Jennifer Lee getting killed rather early in Psycho, but here he didn't get killed. It was he actually had a hymn book in his pocket that protects him from the
yes. No, so Yitzchak, what brought you to watch it? I mean, it's not schlock from the 40s or 50s. It's not a horror film. Is it just because it was around in the public domain? You figured, let's check it out.
Back when it was in the public domain, that's when I watched a lot of those. I think now technically it's not in the public domain anymore, but there was a court case sometime in the 90s that decided that foreign films were able to be protected, and before that took place, that's why I wound up watching it. I was very impressed by it. I think I even had a magnet on my Frigidaire for a while with the poster on it. I don't think it's in my mother's house. Yeah.
Again, I think what if somebody's interested in that period of Hitch's early talkies, You also, of course, have Sabotage, which
Right.
is Oscar Homolka, which is one of the great Hitchcock villains in terms of someone being tortured, uh, and why is he doing what is he doing? Um, and I think the other piece that probably goes is worth seeing once you're seeing that is, of course, The Lady Vanishes,
Right. And
which is
all of these were in a set of VHS tapes that I had at one point. I think those 4 or 5 movies were all in one set.
right. And again, I think the one of the beauties of Hitchcock's films, which I think you can see in Holiday as well, is that the supporting characters are very wonderfully drawn and defined. Hitch was, he used to say that actors are like cattle, but he knew which cattle to choose. He understood that the leads need to have interesting people that are part of the program. There needs to be, even the ones that the main dialogue doesn't center around, should be amusing, should be interesting.
I mean, this is a very entertaining movie. The whole way through, it has a good pace. It doesn't drag at all. It doesn't.
Yeah, well, Hitch. Again, it was only really in his later films in the '60s where you have scenes that seem to be weighted down. I think even Rebecca, which was his first American film, it moves at a almost like a breakneck pace. Suspicion, which is again one of the greater uses of Cary Grant, recommended on this forum, of course, Notorious, which has Grant and Bergman in it, and probably one of the most really important explorations and discovery of what relationships are built on, and condemnation of realpolitik. And again, Hitchcock was able, I think, with using entertaining methods, was able to, I think, make a number of serious points. Almost, every film rings that bell. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a little bit less. But I think even the minor Hitchcock stuff is definitely worth a gander. But I'm impressed with stuff that you chose.
I think this is one of his major works. Certainly, probably. I guess I think it's the best of the British ones. Even though I also like The Man Who Knew Too Much, but this one, I think it was the best movie made in.
I think it's sort of like I agree with you. It's exciting. And I think it has again, Robert Donat. No. Again, his character. I think he might be the weakest link in the film.
Orson Welles is considered to be a masterpiece. He was very impressed with it. He really. I mean, it is the movie that spawned every other action movie. Everything else.
I agree. The idea of, but I think part of what it makes you think about is when things happen to us, as we allow a character to sort of represent us, to take us along for that ride. The ride is meant to bring to enlightenment of some sort, and I think to, in a way, address itself to some vacuousness of the character. The character changes through the trauma of the experience, and for the better. And I think the film needs to do that. It isn't just a sigh of relief that the train didn't hit you and someone came and undid the ropes before you died. There's something about the fact that the character discovers within themselves a certain strength. And The Man Who Knew Too Much, especially in the remake, where you have the Jimmy Stewart character, who really has to find within himself a certain inner strength to be able to to get out of this, which is a situation where his child is kidnapped and he cannot do anything. And I think that is, in a way, not just the excitement. I think you are bound to a character, and you leave the film somehow with the same seeds of growth that the character has. I think, as I've said often in our conversations here, a film that allows you to not just escape from your reality, but to give you coping mechanisms or a method of how to deal with things that are happening in your own life. These are the type of films, I think, that we do this program for, that we know everything because things have been going well. It's really only tribulations and difficulty that allow us to grow and become. And this, of course, is something as rabbis we counsel our congregants consistently, and with our own family, our own children. It's great when films can do that. But I agree with you. I think I guess I'll be the guy who says, yeah, but sometimes you just need something totally stupid and something that which is like a throwaway. In that sense, I would say, you can choose some of the hope. Talk about hope in the Oscars, Yitzchak, and how the Oscars are a popularity contest. Clearly, there was something about Hitch that rubbed Zanuck and many of the other producers the wrong way. I mean, here's somebody whose films are magnificent, nominated 5 times, and he never snagged an Oscar for Best Director. I think Ford got it twice, if I'm not mistaken. And Hitch never won. I mean, he's sort of the person who invented how modern American films.
I was looking through. Someone asked, how many best pictures you really like in history, and I was looking through the list of all the best pictures. And I think I've only seen.
Night is How to Grow Old. I think Hitch knew how to do that as well. I mean, Hitch was very vain, and he was in a way embarrassed of his rotund appearance, and he actually wanted, as it's been documented, he wanted many of his blonde, beautiful leading ladies to somehow come on to him to give him this, the high that he wanted. But he was at least klapi chutz. Hitch, banked on his persona more almost than any other director, and he was able really to produce a series that is a classic of vintage TV. And I'm not talking about the hour episodes; those are much too long. But the half-hour episodes, although he only directed 10 or 12 of them, or maybe even less, he added in his intros and his outros such a wonderful, glib sense of British humor. And
I mean, when those are on. When those are on Nick at Night, when I was a kid, all I cared about seeing was his introductions. I didn't really care about ever seeing the episode itself.
And sometimes he himself, sort of dismissed the significance of the episode. And like Dragnet, he would sometimes talk about what happened at the end or whatever happened to that character after the big reveal. But you can tell that Hitch enjoyed it. He knew how to, in a way, promote himself as this old guy who enjoyed macabre things. You had the Alfred Hitchcock magazine. There was a place that, again, it's obviously was a moneymaker for him because he could put his name to it. But it all added to the aura that surrounded him. And I think, in that way, he aged, in a sense, gracefully. I talked about, Cary Grant, putting the spurs up, when he realized he couldn't really, handle handle a film and being the star of a film. So, talking about the three, I guess the unifying theme is the 3 expatriates that we're talking about here. Hope, Hitchcock, and Leach, otherwise known as Cary Grant. Well, that's it, my friends. So we'll catch you again. Hope all your resolutions, if you do make them, are for only the most positive things. Take care, Yitzchak. Be well, everyone. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.